All right. Welcome, everyone, to day 2 of the ESIP July meeting. My name is Annie Burgess, and I'm the lab director, and just really grateful this morning to see familiar faces, kind of old friends, and a lot of new folks in the crowd. So welcome. Before I tell everyone about the ESIP Lab, I'd like to highlight some kind of special moments from yesterday. So kind of take a look back before we move forward. So we started off yesterday morning with our incomparable speaker, Carrie Jordan, who's in the front row. Say hi to Carrie, everyone. Carrie sang us a very special happy 25th birthday. And Carrie, since ESIP and the Carpentries are both 25, we can now rent a car. So watch out, world. Only time will tell. If we keep working together, what we'll do, even navigating, I'm sure, a few bumps along the way. So thank you, Carrie, for starting us off yesterday. Second highlight. Susan, our executive director, took a big swing yesterday. Like going for a live demo during a workshop, she took a risk. Rather than sitting back in your oh so comfortable conference room chairs and listening, she asked you to lean in and answer a big question. Then she asked you to talk to your neighbor about the big question. And then she asked you to comment on your neighbor's answer to that question. From that big swing, we received 198 suggestions of doors that still must be opened in our path to open science. So I'd say thank you to Susan for giving us that challenge. I thought it was an incredibly fruitful exercise, a way to get things going and really setting the tone for our time together. I'd also like to highlight and give a big shout out to all of our session organizers yesterday. I felt like every time I looked in a room, I saw kind of people turning to their neighbors, getting up and moving. It was a crazy combination of smiling and intensity that you see at an ESIP meeting. And it was just such a joy and a great way to start off the day. So those are my day 1 highlights. There are so many more I could mention, but I hope you all kind of felt those as well. But now let's look forward. So here you can see Slido on the screen and stars next to 2 sort of special events that we have going on. This afternoon, we have a plated lunch where we will celebrate ESIP's 25th anniversary and 2 stellar individuals. One who is awarded the Falkenberg Award and the other our Raskin Scholarship. So I look forward to kind of dining and celebrating with all of you this afternoon. This evening, starting at 5:30, we will have the research showcase that'll take place kind of near where the reception was yesterday in Emerald 3. This is our evening poster and demo event. You can learn about all sorts of exciting events happening around ESIP. We had to cap the number of posters. So many of you wanted to share your work. It was so exciting. I think it raised Megan's blood pressure a little bit to deal with the excitement and logistics, but I think that's a good thing to raise Megan's blood pressure every once in a while. So Megan's our community director. Let's give her a big hand. She's amazing. Yay, Megan. All right. This is looking at tomorrow. We're not going to be gathering as a plenary again, so we figured we would go through these highlights today since we won't be all together as a group tomorrow. Tomorrow is our unconference and our first bit of our Funding Friday event. Susan mentioned these yesterday, but I just wanted to give a little bit more detail as to how these will work. So the unconference is a time for you, the meeting attendees, to drive the agenda. It sounds like a lot of our ideas are already spinning around. I heard people talking about them last night and during the opening plenary. So we have some Post-its at the registration desk and a white kind of board behind the desk for you to add those ideas. You could also just grab one of the Post-its during lunch on Thursday. Starting at 1 p.m., everyone with a session idea will line up here and they'll get 30 seconds to pitch their idea. Once we have heard all of our pitches, we will be rapidly entering those session ideas into Slido, and everyone will get a chance to upvote their top 5 sessions. The 10 most upvoted sessions will get assigned a room, and they will have an hour to chat. Remember, with an unconference, that it's okay for you to move sessions. It's kind of vote with your feet sort of situation. We want it to be a productive hour for you. So just remember that as we're going through that event. Tomorrow evening, we will kick off our Funding Friday event. So could I get a show of hands of who has participated in Funding Friday as a poster drawer or awardee in the past? All right, great. So we have some participants. That's awesome. And we also have some of our Funding Friday awardees from last year here. So thank you all for making the trek. Funding Friday is a grants competition that takes place right here at the ESIP July meeting. To participate, you need to come up with a project idea that you and hopefully some collaborators can finish in about a 6-month period. You'll then join us tomorrow at the Burlington Beer Company to harness your creative side and draw a poster of that idea. First thing Friday morning, we will display all of the posters up in that reception area, the same place the research showcase will be. And we'll vote on, everyone will get a 2-minute pitch, and then we'll vote, and the top 3 attendee posters and the top 3 student and teacher posters will be awarded $5,000 and $3,000 respectively. You have to be in person to claim your award. So that means you have to be there for the pitch. And if you have any questions about eligibility or rules, we do have those up on the ESIP Wiki, or please find a staff member or a member of ESIP leadership, and I'm sure they could help you out with the ins and outs of Funding Friday. So now that we're done with the logistics portion, I'd like to tell you a bit about a program within ESIP called the ESIP Lab. The mission of the lab is to facilitate learning opportunities for earth scientists and data professionals to increase their technical savvy while expanding the collective skill set of our community and knowledge of earth system science. We work towards this mission in several areas. First, and the one that I'll focus on sort of mostly in this talk, is the release of our annual request for proposals that focuses on domain areas driven by input from the community and our sponsor agencies. But what makes our RFP process unique is that we invite project leads to not only propose a technical or science objective, but we also ask that they come up with a learning goal for themselves during the project. So for example, one of this year's funded projects has a technical objective of translating the Climate R library to Climate Pi, making it a Python library. Their learning goal is to figure out how to use GitHub Actions and workflows, which will allow them to be more efficient in accomplishing their technical and science objective. Now, and you can disagree with me on this, in a typical proposal process, an individual likely wouldn't point out what they don't know in order to get funding. But I think this needs to stop. The scientific and academic funding communities can ask for researchers to change the way that they have done and traditionally operated without allowing them to be honest about the effort it takes to change the way they do things. It removes the shame of us having to say, I don't know how to do this, or that it might take me some time to learn this new skill that as a community, we have said that we all need to do. So with that, I'd like to show you the list of our current awardees, and I'm just going to take a minute so you could check out these, check out their titles. So hopefully you can gather that this year's theme was water and wildfire. And I'll tell you, I couldn't have anticipated a year ago how relevant wildfire smoke would be in the Green Hills of Vermont in July. And I'd like to also point out a few of our project leads are here this week, so I'm excited to have them. I'm excited to have them in the mix. And I'm going to pause again. This is a QR code to a blog post that I co-wrote with our amazing communications director. Big hand of applause, Allison Mills, who is over on the right. You can find in this blog post both of their technical and learning objectives. I think those are really insightful, and they show what this kind of early career scrappy ingenuitive is not a word. People with ingenuity have, and they're trying to learn to keep up with our current technical landscape. So again, I'd really encourage you to check that out. All right, now shifting gears from the lab towards our speakers. But first I wanted to call out, you heard Susan mention yesterday our community fellow program, and have likely seen these folks at the front of the rooms during yesterday's breakout. If you haven't met them, they are some of the brightest and most inspiring members of this community. I encourage you to seek them out tonight during the research showcase. If you're interested in learning more about our Communities Fellow program, Megan Carter, our community director, leads that program, and you could ask her about that. There will be a new call for another batch of community fellows this fall. And I bring them up not only to highlight this great group of people, but also because I've asked two of them to help with our intros of our lab plenary speakers this morning. So first up, Shruti. Welcome everyone to Shruti. Shruti is supporting the Community Resilience Cluster. She is in the process of finishing an Erasmus Mundus Master's in Urban Climate and Sustainability. So please welcome Shruti to the stage.
Thank you, Annie. I'm delighted to be here to introduce Dr. Corinne Farewell. Dr. Corinne Farewell is the director of the University of Vermont Innovations. In this role, she guides the academic community on all aspects of moving discoveries out of the lab. She has recently joined the board of the Burlington Community Makerspace Generator Vermont. She's also currently co-chair of the Licensing Executive Society's Industry University Government Interaction Sector. She has served in the Association of University Technology Managers Mentoring Program and taught in the UVM Grossman School of Business teaching Innovation Strategy, a core course in the Sustainable Innovation MBA program. And fun fact, she's a veterinarian by training. So growing up in California and studying engineering, I caught the startup bug early, but I never had any ideas, so that didn't go anywhere. But there's lots of cutting edge research being developed in labs every day. And sometimes it needs a little help to get out there in the world. And Dr. Farewell makes this happen. And we'll talk about how in her talk, opening the tech transfer office door to open science. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Farewell to the stage.
Thank you, Shruti, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to come speak to this wonderful group. I think I am the one among you who's from tech transfer. Do I have anybody else in the room who comes out of tech transfer? Didn't think so. So my goal today is to share a bit about what makes tech transfer people tick, how the offices are measured, and how we can collaborate with open science, open source offices like Verso at UVM. So my passion, aside from being a veterinarian, really is connecting things, connecting dots. When I was a kid, you know that game where you have a bunch of dots and you connect them and it makes a picture? I've made a career out of that. It's really fun and something that I hope I can share with you today. Let's see. So I know nobody here is from tech transfer, but have you ever tried to work with the tech transfer office? Okay. Without calling out places, a lot of tech transfer offices, the door looks something like this, kind of frosty, big old lock, heavy. And sometimes it's really unclear, when do you talk to tech transfer? What's the right point of entry? Is it when I want to patent something that I've discovered in the lab? Patents are often the first thing that's associated with tech transfer. Or how about if I want to start a company? Do I talk to them? Who do I talk to? When I close out a grant, you have to close out and declare if you've made any inventions with that grant. So oftentimes that's the first time somebody will work with us or comes to our office. How about when you're about to submit a publication and somebody in your lab is like, oh, gee, you really should talk to tech transfer before you submit that publication, or as is often the case, before you actually present your work at a conference. Literally, we've had, when I was at a previous institution, our offices were near the airport. And we had folks who stopped in on their way to catch their flight to say, oh, by the way, we're presenting this. Should we protect it? How long's your flight? So yes, it can be done. It's not ideal, but everything is possible. So the answer really is yes to all of the above, but the best relationships, period, start much, much earlier and with a much broader vision than just these traditional areas of tech transfer or things that come to mind. So knock, knock. Who's there? So the folks in tech transfer offices, and this is just highlighting our own, our job and what we're charged with is managing the intellectual property created at the university. We are, when you're ending that grant and you have to tell somebody about discoveries, that's us, to fill in a disclosure form. And we then take it on to evaluate, but not just grant, or not just work that was federally funded. It's really important, and one role, I'll get into this in more depth later, is to really work very closely with our researchers and their grad students about what are the goals of the lab? What are their individual goals? So evaluate, strategize, what's the best way forward? What is the best way to get this technology, discovery, this work out to the world? That's really the name of the game. And that's where open science, open source licensing plays an important role as well as traditional licensing. And to protect, if it's necessary. Some things don't need to be protected. If there are many technologies and discoveries, they don't really need that protection of a patent or other copyright or anything else. And that has to be part of the overall strategy. And then lastly, get it out there. It does very little good sitting literally on the bench in the lab. Transfer it, whether it's a publication, whatever means, transfer that knowledge outside of the lab. The folks in my office have a mix of technical, scientific, entrepreneurial, legal, corporate, and business development experience. That's important to have all those different perspectives. We're a relatively small team that I won't run through the team members per se, but we have a very close working relationship with the Office of General Counsel, as well as Verso and Kendall Fortney, who I saw yesterday. Kendall, are you here today? I thought he might have a conflict today, but anyway. So we work very closely with those offices and others across campus. So traditionally, tech transfer's role was focused on licensing to industry generally for commercial gain. No qualms about it. That is the traditional view of what a tech transfer office does. For those of you who have worked with tech transfer offices, is that pretty much the vibe you got? I would think. Not always true. However, there's a reason that my colleagues behave like that, and let me share that with you. So back in 1980, the Bayh-Dole Act permitted universities to retain the assignment for patents that were generated using federal funds in their labs. So read that the universities were allowed to control the fate of those discoveries. There are obligations that you have to disclose if you do create something using federal funds, you do need to disclose it. That's part of what we then in turn need to disclose to the government. We report, and then you license to those who can get the good or the service out. Now we're hitting really what tech transfer is all about, but there's this other stuff we have to deal with too. It's often used to strengthen industry relationships. So think corporate sponsored research, promote economic growth. Just look at Cambridge, Massachusetts as a great example, and generate income for the university and the inventors. We are obliged to share the proceeds with the inventors, and we use that as a little hook to retain and attract faculty. The rest of the money has to be used to support research and education mission of the university, which frankly is pretty easy. All right. And then on this chart too, which you probably can't see, but this is from the report of the Association of University Tech Managers. That's like our trade association. And it's very clear that this cycle is very much about tech transfer in that old, and forgive me, outdated model. You invent, you disclose, it's evaluated, it's protected. So lots of patents, marketing, licensing, product development, public use, economic growth, R&D. Very much that is, although it's circular here, that linear path, which is wonderful, but not the only way. And certainly many ways have been evolving recently that tech transfer offices are changing their role. Thank heavens. When I started in tech transfer, which was in 2000, it was very much, you get the disclosure, you patent whatever the it is, and you license it to industry. That was my job. And it's wonderful because you could see impact. I was recently at a conference, an animal health conference. You mentioned I was a veterinarian, and this gentleman who I'd done a deal with years and years ago came up to me and said, I'm like, you're West Nile virus. I was like, yes, I am West Nile virus. That was an agreement that we negotiated about a vaccine for horses with West Nile virus. But, you know, I got all warm and fuzzy because I made a difference and somebody remembered. So it was kind of cool. But you get what you measure. And this is really a soapbox of mine, so bear with me. In my mind, our role as the tech transfer people are to work with our faculty and serve, and their grad students, and serve their interests. If their interest is to publish and have the work go in that direction, awesome. If their interest is to see a product developed in the pharmaceutical industry, there's another path we need to take, but we're not driving that decision and that motivation for that lab. And I think that's really, really important for a successful tech transfer office to know who your customer is and to work with your customer on what their goals are and help enable those goals. On the other side is how we're measured. And these literally are the university tech transfer metrics We all have to fess up at the end of the year. How many invention disclosures did we get? How many patent filings did we make? How many patents were granted? Yeah, honestly, those mean nothing. It just means what your patent budget is and how long it took the patent office to review your applications. What does mean something, and if you're looking at it from the other perspective, from the administration of the university, and what I get asked mostly is how many startups were created and what's the revenue? Again, not necessarily the only metrics that matter, but importantly, the startups do give those technologies a platform to get out of the lab. They're always what the desire was of the faculty and or the grad students. You can't make people go through that very difficult path. But the revenue side of it, this is something we do pretty well at University of Vermont, but it's not about the money. It's really about getting the technologies used and out there. And that has to be the focus. And then, of course, how many commercial licenses we have. So these are our metrics. And this is the perception of we are guarding those intellectual assets of the university. Literally, I'm often asked, like, "Psst, psst, can you give me an inside look to your patents?" I'm like, sure. USPTO.gov. It's all public. We're not hiding anything. You want to see the applications? Sure, it's up there too. Or if that's a little difficult to navigate, go to Google Patents. There you'll see the international filings as well. It's very, very open already, but the perception is that we're guarding these assets, which is a little silly. But as I mentioned, those are the metrics as they stand now. We do have to report on them yearly. But things are really changing. And there's a broader vision of what tech transfer's role is in the research enterprise. The first change here is that we're considered part of the research enterprise. We're not like this flea on the dog's tail. We're actually part of the larger enterprise and involved with bringing research dollars to the university as well. Industry, how did this come about? Like some of these changes, the biggest two things happened. One, federal funding got really hard to get. This about 10, 15 years ago, it was increasingly difficult. And industry at the same time was really tapping the brakes on licensing from universities. Not that they weren't, they're still licensing. They still were during that period of time, but they waited. They waited until either the patent issued. We used to do a lot of patent applications, particularly in the physical sciences. They waited until the application actually issued, or they expected and helped in some cases through research projects to develop the technology further at the university. So all of a sudden, the tech transfer offices were asked to patent things without being reimbursed much earlier. Caused a mind shift for us. How are we going to do this? How are we going to partner? So the federal funding is still the core and presumably always will be of research funding at the university, but corporate funding is also, and foundation funding is also really important. So some of those corporate partnerships take roles that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, as sponsored research, fee for service. That's something that's increasing these days, where literally the university labs are kind of used as contract labs. We're allowed a certain percent of that as a university, 5% of your income, but it's changing, and faculty are getting more interested in doing that. Other ways that we've been working with industry, which is kind of cool, are fellowships. Sponsoring fellowships like what was just described, that it's either used as a perk for their employees, also PhD candidate comes in that way. So looking at different ways to work together. So this literally just came out 2 days ago. The University Industry Development Partnership Group kind of just, and this is an interesting read. I won't spend time on it here, but they're saying, gee, folks, we probably should figure out this open science thing before too long. That's a very interesting group too, by the way. I joked the first time I went to that meeting was, this is the room where it happens. It was very, very enlightening. So what's our role? So our new role, and what many tech transfer offices, we're research conduit to the real world impact. And we're working on our mission statement, and any and all suggestions would be greatly appreciated. But really, it's to build that bridge to get between the lab and the world. It's not necessarily a market, but get it out of the lab and for public use. How do we achieve this mission? We partner. I mentioned already, faculty are incredibly important. They are our customers, and we have to have a good customer service, and they're grad students. College leadership, I still do report to somebody. So you have to kind of bring that balance between what the administration wants to see, what the Board of Trustees want to see. But you partner. And newly, we're also partnering with Verso, which is UVM's open science group. And lots of partners externally as well. So the next slide is my "oh, woe is me" slide. When I say partner, we have all sorts of different areas that we work in, and the pie pieces are the ones that are most important. So traditionally it was contracts. License agreements, contracts, but it has expanded significantly, not only for UVM, but for all tech transfer, that we're heavily involved in the entrepreneurship. I mentioned I taught in the MBA program. We are importantly involved with different things for development in both the foundation type of role, but also in the technology areas and education. So and this is not unusual. Many tech transfer offices are doing lots and lots of things. So here's the message. Knock, 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 come in. So Verso is relatively new at UVM, 2022. And it's the Vermont Research Open Source Program Office. It's a pilot project at the university that will build an open source community by empowering sustainable innovation through engagements, educational activities, fellows, internships, and research and community collaboration. And they have been an amazing partner. So a lot of tech transfer offices would look at open science as a threat or a challenge, or how, that just doesn't make sense. No, it's perfectly complementary. And we have a lot of common ground. So this is taken off of their website, but just to show that they started in 2022, Kendall's office started in 2022, ours in 1995, but we still have a lot of the same challenges. Lack of familiarity, not identifying as an open work or innovator, and struggling to find the community, unsure of the resources. So many of these challenges are the same between our groups. It makes for good partners. Again, just kind of beating a dead horse, forgive me, but they're complementary challenges and opportunities, and we're much stronger together. And it's really been an excellent avenue for us to have faculty explore going the open route rather than going the traditional route, or a mix of both. A little bit about where we're heading. It's about relationships. It's about evaluating, developing, and delivering products. So how do we measure success? Like how do I do this now? The autumn metrics, okay, I have to live with those, but what other metrics? And literally, this is a conversation we're having at UVM with my team, with the vice president for research, with the president who we report through the VPR up to the president. How do we measure this? And I hugely applaud our administration for even thinking beyond the autumn metrics. Like, how do we know we're doing a good job? In my humble opinion, what are some of our novel metrics? Some things that we do that isn't captured. Different companies, there's an Institute for Rural Partnerships. We have a pre-seed fund or a proof of concept fund. Half of the faculty that do that go on to be interested in commercializing their technologies. We have an undergraduate internship program with 27 students that has been hugely successful. Different ways that tech transfers is working to bring things forward. And then some corporate experiences, some traditional, the startup companies. These are, for the most part, the startups anyway are here in the Burlington area, but also the way that we're traditionally measured. So that is a gallop through tech transfer, hopefully sharing some ways to relate and to be in touch with your tech transfer office. I'm hoping I didn't babble on too long, that we don't have time for some questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Corinne. I know there are a lot of folks in the room that kind of going to, I think, question number 3, have challenge with what in the federal agency is infusion, technology infusion. So kind of the end of the tech transfer role, but let me get to a couple of these questions. So the first question is, how does the recent OSTP Open Access Nelson memo affect the tech transfer and its relation to the Baugh-Doyle Act?
Yep. To be determined, frankly. I think there are a lot of conversations, and that was a little bit what that UIDP alluded to, but it will affect tech transfer in my humble opinion. It will be to the complement, but what we have to be really careful of is that there aren't conflicts with how work is funded. That's where we're going to start getting into conflicts between what was funded originally and not considered open, but then had additional funding that was open. I hope I'm answering the question, but it's definitely to be determined.
Great. Let's see. Let's go to, how do you help scientists learn about or choose licenses for their data, code, hardware designs?
So a lot of how do we choose? So we help the scientists. Generally, it's a little bit proactive, but it's very reactive. So you're at a meeting, you've presented, and an industry partner or somebody has come up to you and asked, well, do you want this technology of yours to be used in this way? Or we would like to license it for use in this way. That's where we get involved, and we strategize with the faculty member what's the best path forward for them. And we're the bad guys in that negotiation. We're definitely bad cop about protecting the researcher and their work. It's very much that we take on what comes to us. You know, we may make introductions early on, but for the most part, we take on what comes to us. We're not in a position to choose.
All right, so let's do one more, and I think this is the can of worms one. Isn't the idea of patents and, quote, protecting intellectual property fundamentally antithetical to open science?
No. So a patent, if we'll go back to old Thomas Jefferson now, the origins of why patents exist was to provide an enabling description of that technology and to provide the original originator or inventor a period of time for a monopoly. So that period of time, yes, there are closed doors, but I really don't see that the two are not complementary and can't be used together. One of the areas that is very, very active right now are consortiums of different industry groups. So back when I was at the University of Rochester, we had a semiconductor consortium. Those people are very protective of their patents, but it could make it work because the work that was shared and was open was pre-competitive. So why did they care? Why would they come to even show any of their assets? It saves them time, it saves them money, and those two things increase shareholder value. So that's it is not. It is competitive, it's difficult, it's messy, but it can be done at the same time. If you're getting into the areas of competitive research, then yes, probably patents are needed. Pharmaceutical industry is a great example of that.
Even though I don't want to necessarily chat right after the phrase pharmaceutical industry, let's give Corinne a big round of applause. Thank you so much. That was really insightful.
Yeah. Sometimes you dance with the devil.
That's right. Well, I think we could recently appreciate some of the things the pharmaceutical industry has helped out with, but yes, I really appreciate that perspective, Corinne. And next I'd like to invite Jake up. Jake is currently in his second year or just finished his second year of his PhD program at Indiana University studying sedimentology. And I will hand it over to Jake.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for helping me out right there. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Jake Guerin. And as someone who works to communicate about the hazards of extreme river sedimentation through things like maps and GIS products, I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, Scott Reinhardt. Based out of Brooklyn, New York and Sharon, Connecticut, Scott works as a graphics editor at the New York Times, focusing on cartography and data visualization. Now, you may have seen his work tracking air quality across the US or his damage maps from the aftermath of the tragic earthquake in Turkey and Syria this past February. He also holds a master's in graphic design from North Carolina State University, and you can check out his work at scottreinhardtmaps.com. So please help me in welcoming Scott Reinhardt. Yep.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. I feel very honored and excited to kind of meet you all and get out of my bedroom and see you all. So I kind of wanted to talk about a few things today. A little bit, I'm going to kind of start on this like strange path that I've taken to arrive, I guess, here right now. And with my work at the New York Times, honestly, like a lot of that, a big part of that step was working with open data. And so a lot of the things you do kind of has enabled me to move forward into new areas and new paths in my life and in my career. So that's also a reason I'm really honored and excited to be here. And then I'm just going to take you through some of the work I do. I tried to give kind of like a wide breadth of types of data that I work with. And so kind of think about that as I'm talking through that in different ways and methods and that I use to show different types of data. And then I'm going to end with a set of projects that I think probably overlap with a lot of the work you do, or potentially probably supplied by the data with the work that you do. So that's just, what I'm going to do with this talk today. I have a tendency also to pack way too much work into talks that I give. And so my apologies, I'll try to keep things moving. I am a graphic designer by training. Like Jake said, I have an undergraduate and graduate degree in graphic design. My formative years were in Chicago as a graphic designer at the Museum of Contemporary Art. And this was I love this piece, but I worked in a small design and publishing department there, and kind of had my hands in like everything. And I think that was really formative for me because it kind of continues to this day and is like really well suited for my role at the New York Times, where I have my hand in everything as well. And I'm just like constantly learning and wanting to do many different things. But a big thing I did when I worked at the museum was I worked in publishing and I worked in book design. And, that turned out to be quite relevant in that I, work in a newspaper now and also in publishing. And the fact of like committing knowledge to ink on paper, right? It has to be right. And it's kind of permanent in a way. And there's something I really love about that. But the other thing too that I love about book design, this is like a short clip of all the books I ever designed. I think deeply about what's the best form that content or data should take, and so you can kind of see this when I'm working with different artists or different curators on shows or the exhibition catalogs. I'm always thinking like, what is that form? What is kind of unique about the ideas behind this work that I can kind of translate into a physical form? And that continues to this day. So after I left working in museums and kind of in the cultural space, what I was finding is, which is normal, is like I was getting the same type of work, but I wasn't ready to kind of be pigeonholed into that, just doing that type of thing. I kind of wanted to expand, and I wanted my career to kind of be expansive, and I wanted to continue to learn. So I went to NC State, wonderful school, and it was just this really wonderful 2 years that I gave myself to kind of learn as much as I can in as many different areas as possible. And so I had this slide is a bunch of weird visualizations or coding examples that I was working with. But really, during that time, I really started a practice of making things just for myself, and making things as an excuse to kind of learn and expand on what I've already learned, and just kind of that practice continues to this day. And I think it was like kind of really important that there wasn't a goal in mind aside from kind of learning things and making and continuing and not like judging what I was making, but just continuing on. And also learning as much as possible in many different avenues, because what happens at a certain point is all those avenues really, they kind of start to overlap and they start to connect in ways that kind of I couldn't imagine. So one of the things that was kind of unexpected about my time in graduate school was I came into the world of GIS. I didn't really know what GIS was before graduate school, and but I learned then. And I took an intro to GIS class, and it kind of blew my mind a bit. And so I had this new set of tools. And then I had this new medium that I'm working with, which is like data, something I didn't know about that existed. And, but same deal, I was just like working for myself. I was just having fun with it, and no goals in mind. I didn't consider myself a cartographer at that point. It was just like, whoa, this is cool. Whoa, this is cool. And kind of the biggest thing and the thing that, I was always kind of, again, blew my mind was like, well, this data is just available and it's just like anyone can have it. Like just me in my bedroom, like it's amazing. And I think about that all the time. I think about that every day, honestly, when I'm working, even at the New York Times, I like, wait a minute, they just let anyone, like any old person have it, like cool. and so these next few slides were some of those just early sketches that I was making and learning about, like, as I was making these, I grew up in Indiana, and like, always, no offense, but always felt Indiana was kind of boring. The landscape of Indiana was really boring to me when I lived there. And then I started doing these visualizations and like playing around with elevation data, and then seeing the evidence of like glaciers in the elevation that I would never see on the ground as you're driving over it, because it's just like too different of a scale. It was just like, oh my gosh, and it's just like that thing that I'm always looking for when I'm working. It's like, because I work on so many different types of, subject matter. I kind of have to become an amateur expert all the time in different subjects. And so I'm always like looking for that thing that clicks into my understanding. And so I'm always kind of trying that. So anyways, I moved to New York after grad school and just was working in a, graphic design studio, going about my life, but in my free time, having fun with this, working with your data, exploring. And again, because just for me, the only goal was really to learn and really have fun with it. And, and those progress. And like I said, those different avenues that I was working on, they just like started to connect and overlap. And, so I started working with GIS data, but then I had these like other explorations in 3D, and then those started to connect. Or, I was like working in GIS data, but then I was also working in code, like in processing, and then in 3D as well. And so those started to connect, and this is kind of a similar thing. Or, then I started like looking at old maps, and this is the lake that my grandparents had a cottage on when I was growing up, right? So like deep feelings about it. And I found this, kind of like DNR map from 1961. And I just was thinking like, oh, it'd be kind of interesting. I'm working in 3D. And, what if I like, added some depth to it to see. And, I had that kind of moment too where it clicked, in this like place that had so much meaning to me. I then had a new understanding of it. I was like, oh, this like really came to life for me. And then I also, one thing leads to another. And then I was thinking, okay, well, I just created that contour and made the bathymetry and on my own. But like, there's this whole world of data that is, what if I took elevation data and these old maps? Like, what would that be like, And so then I like started putting that together, and it was like, it created this new thing. And I deeply love old maps. I'm like a graphic designer. I really appreciate the craft involved and the science. And the other thing that really was really very cool to me is thinking about data in its different forms and how it lives, and how it kind of lives in paper maps that might have been in a flat file for 100 years, but like once you activate that with the data, it comes back to life, right? Points on the earth don't change. These maps were so well crafted that those points don't change. And it's amazing to me that you compare that with, the most accurate data available today, and it still works together. I think that just really is wonderful, and creates like a new thing. I deeply love the USGS topo maps, and I still think about these a lot. I did this one last week. I think about this a lot too, is like playing with scale, going really close in on topo maps, and then like LiDAR data, just like really pairing, this different data sources together in interesting and novel ways. And so this work that I was playing with on my own, like, was just kind of starting to get out in the world a little bit. I was doing kind of interesting projects with that. This was a 3-story tall visualization at Beloit College. The architect Jeannie Gang did this building. This file, just for, I feel like you'd appreciate this, was 160 gigabytes. It was like a technical feat and a design and cartographic feat. Anyways, though, at the end of 2018, I was going about my business as a graphic designer, and I got an email from my colleague Larry Buchanan at the New York Times. He said, "Hey, we've seen your work. Do you want to come in to talk shop?" And yeah, sure, I'll come in to talk shop at the New York Times. Yeah, okay. And so I go in the next day, and it was Larry, and it was the director of graphics, and then it was the director of graphics boss, and I kind of like, it like occurred to me like, oh, this is like more than talking shop, and I started working there in 2019, and throughout 2019, I freelanced with them and kind of like learned, truly this like new career in my mid-30s. It's like this detour that was just like really unexpected, but credit to my boss who kind of took a chance on me, who kind of like saw this spark and talent in certain areas, and kind of knew that he can kind of bring me along and I can learn, being a journalist essentially. And so, I started working there and was working on kind of these, like getting my feet wet in these like little stories, right? So like, not little stories, but bite-sized types of graphics. And kind of throughout 2019, I did that. I kind of want to highlight this one story that's like really close to my heart. Also about data that lived in one form, and I really kind of brought it to life in another. This was a story that I did about the Whitney Biennial. It's an art show that happens every 2 years at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City. And basically it's highlighting the best artists in America every 2 years. It's been going on since 1932. I was looking at old catalogs and realized that they put the artist's home address in the catalog. And so to me, that was like a light bulb too. It was like, whoa, okay. At the peak of these artists' career, we have their home address. Like, that is so cool. What could we do with that? Right? What could I do with that? What can that tell us? Well, it can tell us, in a way, what are the centers of American art, across the United States, but then also like in cities, where the artists were gathered. And especially in New York City, it was so interesting to kind of watch over the years as they shifted different places in Manhattan and kind of into Brooklyn now. Anyways, that kind of like brought that to life in a new way. I really love thinking about data in that way of, it exists in these very like technological forms, but it also exists in these other forms, like data is everywhere, right? So in 2019, I kind of freelanced on and off with them. And I got an email from my boss in January 2020, or he reached out to me in some way. And he said, what are the next 2 months looking like for you? We have this pandemic's coming, and we kind of need like all hands on deck, And in January 2020, I like knew about it happening elsewhere. I wasn't really thinking about it. I didn't know that would, like everyone, like change my life so drastically. But so I came back to work, and I've been working full time since then at the Times. I came back to work on March 11th, 2020. And I came back to help with the COVID tracker. And so when I got back, it was really interesting. There was like less than 1,000 cases. The COVID tracker was honestly a pretty common exercise of things we do at the times. And it was living in a Google spreadsheet, so every case was being tracked in a Google spreadsheet. And I was on the publishing team for the tracker. And so every day, a few times a day, we'd kind of, refresh the pages, right? Republish all of the maps and pull in new data, make sure everything's working, making sure international data, US data is cool. The reporters give the thumbs up. And then I was the person that, ran the scripts and the processes to like refresh everything, make sure it's looking good on the homepage, just making sure everything was working, because from the morning to the afternoon, when I would refresh in the morning and refresh, there'd be 1,000 new cases. Oh my God. And then, but a week later, there'd be 10,000 new cases. Oh my God, and so I saw this kind of firsthand in the data, but then also subsequently I was watching how our technological infrastructure was also handling this, right? We do things like this a lot, this kind of tracking, but obviously never at that scale. This was something from 2019. There was a measles outbreak, and we did a very similar type of exercise. We kind of call county health departments and really are kind of keeping track and updating these maps. And, I think that's what we all thought this would be too. We would do this for a little bit and then other stories would come along. But of course, like it didn't, and it kept growing. And, and that data, yeah, it was amazing to watch behind the scenes as we were building out these systems that really kind of became pieces of infrastructure in a way, that were initially handling thousands of cases and then broke the Google spreadsheet. And then we had to transfer it to a larger, more robust database that then obviously was able to handle tens of millions of data points. Early on in the pandemic, the New York Times devoted a lot of resources to the reporting of the data, and then we made that data available as well. Another task of mine too, and it just became this like ritual in a way, a really tough ritual, but every day at 5 p.m. I would stop what I was doing and make the print map, the hotspots of the kind of current state of COVID in the US. And I did about 250 of these maps, among the other work that I was doing. But it was just like this drumbeat for a long time. And I worked on the publishing of the COVID tracker for about a year and a half, and then moved on to other things. But also part of this too was like, that was like the data side of things, but then there was like the human side of things. And, so I made a lot of maps that helped like tell the stories. This was a story about COVID in this particular area of Queens that's very dense, and for a time was like the epicenter of COVID in the United States. And so like the maps were like had a different purpose in a way, right? They were kind of more evocative, and I wanted the maps to kind of be appropriate to the story and the mood. It's not just about communicating a fact, but also kind of communicating the mood too. Like different stories have different purposes, and then the form that these maps take change as well. Or like people leaving New York, right? New Yorkers fled. And so we got some postal data that showed showed where New Yorkers were going. A lot of them were going to the Hamptons. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of kind of domestic and international stories that I've covered as well, and then I'll move on to some climate, natural disasters, and that kind of thing. But this was, after we had all the election data come in after the 2020 election, we did a big spread of, kind of look back. It was about a month after the election. We wanted to make sure everything was in. A look back of like, what happened, right? How did things change? and that's like a really interesting question to a graphics editor. How do you show that, like how do I understand, just on a personal level, because it's like where it starts, is like, how do I understand what's going on, especially with this data? And how do you kind of represent this type of data in a way that doesn't get into the like, the red map with little blue, that kind of thing? How do I kind of like represent this as accurately and with some nuances as possible, in the shift? And so one of the things I was like really thinking about was there's kind of two things going on, right? If I just show shifts, like percentage shifts of votes, it might overrepresent places where there's very small populations, but big shifts, right? So there might be 1,000 people in a precinct or a county, and the vote might have shifted 40%. If I treat that the same way as an urban area that might have 100,000 votes, but shifted 3-4%, right? That's like, it's not doing, that's not, it's not the full picture and the full story. And so I was kind of interested in showing percentage shift and kind of like the vote totals, right? And so I made these arrows do a lot of work. And so how I kind of ended up doing this was length of arrow was percentage shift, but raw vote totals was like width of arrow. So kind of the mass, and I was kind of thinking of it almost in a physical sense, right? So if there's like small populations, it's kind of easy to make big shifts in percentage because there's like not that many people. So it's kind of wispy and it can change very easily. Whereas larger areas with larger, population totals, it's harder to make these big shifts. I'm going to go back one, and so they're going to be shorter, but they're going to have some bulk to it too. Anyways, I think, I think that was at least, again, at least for me, it helped me understand what happened in 2020. But then we also took a look back at 2016 and 2008 and with the kind of same method. And that also kind of helped me understand, and hopefully our readers understand how things changed in those years as well. I'm going to show this next one, which is almost like this is a lot of data, right? There's like a lot of things happening. And the next one, well, it was like the next sequence in this particular story, but shows kind of like the time frames of like things I work on too vary quite a bit. And sometimes the data that we have available to us is very, very limited, right? It's like, but yet we report that and visualize that too. So this was the first map of the January 6th insurrection that appeared in the New York Times. And like, this went out on January 6th. And I like to show this because it's like, this is what we knew at this point. Obviously, as more information came out, the graphics and the visualizations, the stories like reflected that. But at this moment, right, when I was sending this print at, 5:30 p.m. on January 6th, this was it, I've caught in the other things I've done too, I kind of cover these world events too. And so this was a larger visualization of when the US was leaving Afghanistan and the Taliban was kind of taking over. We had this great source very detailed source that throughout the war was documenting the cover, the Taliban control in the various parts of Afghanistan, and that helped us kind of show how that situation ended up there. So I'm going to keep going. I covered the invasion of Ukraine. the buildup and the early days of the war. And then again, as we knew more about what was happening, our graphics kind of shifted to reflect that. So I'm going to go through some climate and natural disaster. So I really like animating this type of information. I think it's not only just like showing data. This is deforestation in Brazil, but it's also kind of like when you animate something, at least to me, you kind of like, you can see behavior. You know, I can kind of understand deforestation. If I just looked at maybe a few small multiples of these maps, it like might not make sense, or I might not get it. But when I see that moving, I'm like, oh, this is how this actually happens. This is, you know, I think I follow this under like, wow, this is just amazing data that, you know, to work with. I deeply love the GOES satellites and the information data that comes out of those. They're pretty coarse from a spatial resolution, but sometimes like the story or the coverage area is so big that kind of doesn't matter. And then that beautiful like 10-minute resolution comes into play. And so this was wildfires in September, I think 2021, where basically the whole West Coast was going up in flames, you know, and some of these wildfires like 100 miles tall. And so so that kind of coarse spatial resolution of the GOES satellite kind of didn't matter, you know, and so I could really show these wildfires in a way that was I'd never seen before. Or this too, I love this, was like same year, same wildfire season, but like showing the lightning, you know, and I got this data set down to the like microsecond of lightning strikes, which is just also kind of mind blowing. I've never seen those patterns kind of in motion. Or we're working with a researcher who was taking radar slices of wildfires and these pyro CB clouds of basically these wildfires are getting so big that they're creating their own weather systems. And so we worked with this researcher to show the wildfire in 3D, show how it's creating its own lightning, it's increasing the wind, spreading the wildfires. I'm going to jump through these. You know, and then like, I think I'm thinking about too with these, where the scales of these phenomena are getting larger and larger. A question I'm always thinking of too is like, how do you show this? Like, how do you like just show the immensity of that too? And so like for this particular fire, I had two kind of cracks at that, like two chances to do that. One for different stories, but like one, I tried to show the fire like really big, as you kind of see here on the left, and like 70 miles across, you know. But then on the other one, I thought like, well, actually, what if I show it smaller, but at the scale of California? I think that was like a little more impactful to maybe like you're really seeing the state of California and kind of how massive that fire was. I'm going to skip through these. Oh, this one. So this was the volcanic explosion in Tonga. I work the Sunday shift, so I cover for the team if anything happens on a Sunday. This is one that's happened. And what I love about this one is I love how it turned out, but I also love that I publish at the end of my shift. So kind of like within 24 hours, when a volcano, you know, erupts on the other side of the world, let's see if I can get that to play one more time. I could show lightning strikes. I got this CSV with 400,000 lightning strikes that came out of that. And then with the GOES satellite data too, I was able to pair that and get an animation, which that really showed me a lot of what was going on by the end of my shift. That's just really, really neat to be able to do. I love showing bathymetry. This is me just going to tell you guys how much I love the GOES satellite. Just beautiful. I usually make beautiful, beautiful, beautiful animations on that. tornado data, showing this like 260-mile tornado. This was kind of the day after the earthquakes in Turkey. This was from last month, the smoke. And then I'm going to end on this project I worked on last year about fog in San Francisco. So this was, as an East Coaster or Midwesterner growing up, but live on the East Coast now, I knew about some fog, and I knew that it was like a San Francisco thing, but I didn't really understand it. And so like that story was an excuse for me to really get to know, like, why does this happen in this place, And so I worked with this researcher who took 25 years of GOES data and came up with an algorithm that could look at a pixel and say, is that fog or is that not fog? Which is very cool, and provided me with that. And so what I was able to do is use it in a few different ways. And so in this animation, what you're seeing is 25 years averaged by day of where fog is. And with this visualization, you can see how fog starts. Fog starts in Southern California. You kind of get June gloom, and then it works up the coast. And that, I didn't know that that was like a connected phenomenon, right? And it ends in August and September in San Francisco. And so what I wanted to do then too was get to the bottom of how does fog form? What are the phenomenon that come together to form fog, and like why in this particular place? And I talked to the experts, and they kind of told me this and this, and okay, I get that. I want to like now see that in the data, and so I really set out to understand that. Right, so there's the North Pacific High that's like churning water down the coast. And so one question is like, well, what's the best way to show that? Like pressure, that's like a pretty abstract thing. I found that like actually showing wind speed was a really helpful way, because that's also, everything's connected, of course. And so that was like one kind of avenue into that. So like the wind is pushing, ocean currents and pushing warm water away from the coast, and cold water is coming up from the deep. So I got to do a nice like sea surface temperature, and to really show that, oh yeah, that is cold water near the coast of California. And then through GOES data, I wanted to show, or GOES like imagery, I wanted to show the actual fog. And then, kind of to answer that question of like, but like, why San Francisco? Well, there's coastal mountains all the way down the coast of California, and the Golden Gate is actually a bridge, but also a geographic feature. It's the gap in the mountains. And, for a few different reasons, but one of the reasons is the fog gets pulled through is because of kind of warm air in the Central Valley, pulls that fog in, and, kind of a daily occurrence. So I'm going to end it on this. And so finally with this, I wanted to know, or I wanted to see, I knew there's like microclimates in San Francisco, and different neighborhoods are cool or warm, depending on where they are. So I wanted to see that. The kind of only problem there was once you get to that scale and that, the data was a little too coarse. And so I wanted to simulate that so that we can, on a more granular level, show fog in San Francisco. So with wind speed, wind direction, we know generally how high fog gets, as well as elevation data. We ran a fluid simulation, and the experts we worked with at USGS said that was like one of the best teaching tools that we've seen on fog, which like really meant a lot as kind of, again, an amateur expert kind of coming into this area. To hear that from the real experts was really satisfying and really gratifying. So so I just want to say thank you so much for having me again. there's my email also, and I just want to like invite you all to just be in touch with me. We speaking kind of for my colleagues also on the graphics desk, may have worked with you in the past, but really enjoy working with you all. We're always open to thoughts and ideas, or if you have novel data sets or new things you're working on, like just be in touch. You know, we're really interested in the work that you all do. We love partnering with you all, and are always thinking kind of interesting ways to show that your work and the data to our readers, and in new and kind of interesting ways. So thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much, Scott. Let's just dive right into questions because I know this community has a few. So what do you, okay, so this is a very ESIP question. What do we do as data providers that make your job easier? What do we do that makes your job harder or
Sure.
more irritating? And what do you wish we would do differently?
Sure. Sure. Okay, so I think like in terms of what you do really well is like have this data. I mean, you put it in, right? You do really wonderful at that. I'd say the hard things, and it's certainly not your fault, because I think what you're all generally doing with the data isn't really like for us in a way. Like when I'm working on deadline and I have just till the end of the day to like figure out how to access this data set, and you know, it's like not really the purpose of the data. So like, so that's kind of on me to figure this out. But you know, I've really fallen in like rabbit holes of documentation and things like that too. And I find myself kind of levels deep in documentation that sometimes is kind of hard. That would be my that's just kind of my experience. But again, like that's not really on you, but that's something I run into quite a bit.
All right, thank you. Here's a search question. How do you find data? Google search? Do you use particular data portals?
Right. I mean, yeah. You know, I think over time we have like certain familiarities with data. So if I'm working on like weather stories, I generally know you know, where to go, and you know, at NOAA. But I would also say too, I really don't hesitate to like reach out to the data managers, you know, because because it's like a time thing, and what's the best use of my time? Is it, again, like get layers and layers deep into kind of figuring out the documentation, or just like reaching out to somebody, getting on a call for 30 minutes and you know, kind of learning, you know, figuring that out too. So, you know, it might be a Google search that takes me to the place, or it just might be past knowledge that I have, or it might be you know, I might just reach out to colleagues and be like, hey, I'm working on this thing. And they're like, oh yeah, we used to, you know, we worked with so-and-so over at USGS, or we worked at so-and-so over at NOAA. And they'll put us in touch too. So there's like an institutional knowledge, Google searching, my knowledge, that kind of thing. So it's a variety.
Great. Let's see. So we scientists visualize data all of the time for our work. We're also often really bad at it. What advice do you have for making our visualizations better?
Yeah. Sure. Well, there are different purposes, right, to what I do and what you all are doing too. But just a general approach that I take when I'm visualizing data. Well, first, kind of think about the same thing I've been talking about. What is that thing that clicks, right? That helps you understand it too. Focus on that thing. You know, that's one thing. Our general approach to graphics at the Times too is stripping away. Like it's just constant editing. and what really needs to be there. I think that's a real thing that we focus on and think about a lot too, is what are just the key things that need to be in this visualization? What makes something kind of intuitive too? Sure, if you need a key, of course, right? But I don't like to put too much weight on a key, or I don't like to put too much weight on a long annotation or explanation. Of course, if you need that, use it, of course. But I think about these graphics at like a few different levels, kind of first glance, a little bit longer read, or kind of like a deeper dive, or kind of like my old graphic design mind of, if I'm putting something on the wall, you got like a 1-foot view, a 10-foot view, a 50-foot view. And I kind of think about that too, in the same way when I'm making graphics too. What is the thing? Like, what are you trying to say? And how do you, hit the viewer with that so that it's like intuitive? I think, anyways, I think that is probably a big thing. It's the process of simplification. It's the process of editing, and thinking like, what is the thing that makes it click for you? And I think if it kind of clicks for you, even though I know you all are the experts, but then probably the reader or the viewer is going to kind of connect with that as well.
All right, thanks so much. We only have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to try to sneak one more in. So besides GIS, what other software do you use to create your work?
Yeah, so right, so there's generally a few levels, right? There's the like data processing. So I work with GDAL a lot, the scripting, the GIS scripting language. That's like when I'm doing a lot of data processing. My like go-to GIS programs, QGIS. And then from there, if I'm doing an animation, I'm working in After Effects probably. And so probably my data processing goal is to get frames, right? I want frames that I can then, animate and put into motion. Or if I'm making a static graphic, I'll probably go into Adobe Illustrator. And then I'm kind of the Adobe suite, Photoshop, that kind of thing. But actually a lot of the static things that I would do would be in Illustrator. And honestly, like a lot of the videos that I make, we have processes that we do that I can have video, but with like Adobe Illustrator graphics on top of it. Or I can pipe in kind of dynamic data as well if I want like dates that are moving on a graphic and that kind of thing. And then for elevations and things like that, I'll use like Blender, kind of an open source 3D software. Processing the script, the coding language is an old favorite of mine as well. So yeah.
What was your coding language?
Processing.
Processing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, okay. Well, with that is time. It's 10 o'clock right now. Time for break. Scott, there's a lot of questions left on Slido, which means there's a lot of people that probably want to chat. So let's give Scott one more big round of applause.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thanks to everyone in the room for your attentive listening this morning. We have a break set up upstairs. So I'm looking at my colleagues to tell me if that's where the break is upstairs. Yeah, so thanks everyone.